So, Anita, thank you so much for joining us today. And the topic that we wanted to address in this interview is changes in the media industry. And the first question we have is like, we've seen during this Corona crisis, if we may call it like that, um, a peak in the news consumption, but at the same time, media companies not able to monetize on that. So why is there still this gap between information providing part of news and the business side of news?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here today. Well, the Corona crisis has kind of accelerated some trends when it comes to the media business. So it has kind of accelerated the trend that people are consuming content digitally. It has, for some media organizations, also accelerated the trend towards digital subscriptions and digital memberships. But obviously what the crisis didn't and couldn't and can't do is it can't from one day to another change consumption behaviors and user behaviors. And it's a fact that users of media, there is still a relatively small willingness to pay for digital news. It's growing every year. If you look at the numbers that just have been presented in the Reuters Digital News Report, you see that there is an uptick every year in all countries. But in many countries, these numbers still range somewhere between 6 and 10% of users that are actually willing to pay for news. So it just takes time to drive a behavioral change, and that is a behavioral change. And obviously that is the dilemma that many media organizations are in, because time is the thing that they don't have, because the advertising revenue is declining so quickly, and subscription revenue and membership revenue doesn't increase at the same pace. And that's obviously a problem for many media organizations, and that's why we are seeing layoffs, furloughs, and consolidation in the market.
You mentioned the user behavior as part of this challenge, and looking more into the media organizations themselves, it seems like they all agree that they need to embrace digital transformation. That's clear, but still there seems to be so much challenge that they are unable or unwilling to test and try with innovation internally. What kind of change processes a company needs to go through in order to really make innovation a priority?
So when it comes to innovation in media organizations, we all obviously have been hearing for 10 or 15 years, yes, we are digital first, and yes, transformation is a top priority for us. Now, saying that and doing that are obviously two very different things. One thing that we still sometimes see, and I hope we're going to see it less often in the future, is that some organizations say they are prioritizing transformation, but when you look at how they actually invest their resources, how they actually live innovation or not live innovation in their organization, how they assign teams, and what the products are that they actually take a look at in the morning, it's still pretty often the printed paper in the morning meeting that the editor-in-chief or the managing editor takes a look at. So I do feel that there is still a gap between saying, yes, we are doing something, and then actually doing it. Because prioritizing, and I think that's something that needs to be clear, prioritizing means also saying no to certain things. So if you prioritize digital and prioritize transformation and prioritize culture change, because ultimately a lot of this transformation is not so much about just a tiny tweak in the business model, it's about the massive cultural transformation in the organization. Prioritizing that means saying no to certain behaviors, stopping certain investments that don't align with your innovation strategy. Strategy is very much about saying no to things. And if you don't say no to things and just add things additionally to what you're already doing, obviously that doesn't mean you're truly prioritizing. So I do feel that with the current crisis and kind of the sense of urgency being even heightened and increased, I do feel that some companies are really, getting the message that now is really the time to honestly and consciously prioritize transformation, and to also invest the time to work with their teams on the culture in their organization. That sounds a bit touchy-feely, and I know that media companies and media managers don't like to talk about culture. They like to talk about new revenue models and new ways to drive conversion. But ultimately, it all boils back to the culture. Do we allow innovation? Do we foster innovation? Do we foster collaboration and interdisciplinary teams? Do we build career paths for our employees and become attractive employers again? Do we change the way that leadership is perceived in our organization? Do we move away from a command and control leadership style to a more coaching and collaborative leadership style? These are ultimately the things that will decide whether a media organization is successful with their transformation or not.
I have a follow-up question, which is actually a question that you wrote, but I'm not sure if you have the answer already, or at least you know where to start answering, which is, how can we then build a better, more sustainable post-corona media world, or at least how can we start doing it?
I think we can take this crisis that obviously has many detrimental effects on media, and every journalist who loses their job now, or anyone else, there's nothing to sugarcoat that. But what we can do is we can use this crisis as an accelerator of our transformation process. And what I mean by that is one thing that became increasingly clear over the recent years, but it's becoming even more clear now in the current situation, is that if you're not laser sharply focused on your audience and the community you're serving and the needs you're actually fulfilling for them, you will have a very hard time persuading people to become a member of or pay for your content or your stories, or become part of your initiative as a media organization. So that means truly prioritizing work with the community, and that might sometimes also mean adjusting the topics that you're covering, adjusting the way you're telling stories, adjusting the way you perceive your journalism and things that you think are important, but your audience says, well, we actually don't really care about that. We have other things that we worry about that we want you to help us with. I think that's a number one priority, and should be a number one priority for many media organizations. The second thing that I'd say is really revenue diversification. I still see, and we have these kind of waves from time to time in media, where something comes up and then many media organizations seem to hope that this is kind of the silver bullet that's going to cure everything. Like, oh, a few years ago it was video on social media. Let's all pivot to video. It's going to solve all our problems. I think if there is one truth about business models in media, then it's that there is not one truth. There isn't one silver bullet, right? Revenue diversification and building a stable revenue model with different sources is absolutely key to becoming more sustainable, because what it ultimately means is that you're building the different pillars in a way that if one year one of them doesn't perform as well, you can compensate it with other pillars. So I do feel that's something we see if media organizations that are smarter and have been smarter about smartly diversifying their revenue are in general faring better in the crisis. And then number three, I feel we have a long way to go when it comes to investing in our employees, investing in talent, and investing in culture. Here in the US, but also in Germany, the numbers, the diversity numbers, when you look especially at the leadership levels in media organizations, are a disaster. There was a study recently done in Germany that showed that pretty much zero of the editors-in-chief and leading editors of all surveyed media organizations have a person of color in their leadership team. We all know that that there are too few women in leadership teams. In 2020, there is just no excuse for that, and users as well as employees are also just not accepting it anymore. And that ranges from the obvious things like all male, all white panels, to leadership teams that are not diverse, but it also reaches things like how do we treat the people in our newsrooms? How do we provide them a perspective? Do we provide them a career path? Do we provide them with a certain amount of freedom to be part of something impactful and meaningful? So everything that you would kind of summarize under culture. And I think, and what I do see, and that is what makes me happy, that some media organizations are realizing now that this is something that they neglected in the past. And I think that's going to be absolutely essential if we want to build a stronger media future.
Thank you. I think these are extremely relevant points. And I would say these are not just tips for media houses, but also the startups themselves should consider when implementing.